Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Ikigai with Jennifer Shinkai, wherever you are watching or listening to this episode. It's episode 5. And wherever you are in the world, I am very happy to introduce you to someone I've never actually met in real life. We are Zoom buddies only. And this is Dr. Justin Sanders. He's the director of Temple University's Japan Continuing Education Program. And the reason that I was so interested in Justin, and I'm going to call you Justin, not Dr. Sanders.
Please,
I know that we,
Justin.
of course, need to use people's titles, but for our conversation today, let's be first name basis. So when we were first talking about this podcast, it was really interesting to hear about how continuing education can support Ikigai in 2 ways. One, as being of itself, the thirst for learning, the thirst for knowledge being its Ikigai. And then on the other side as well, if there's something that you're feeling this call towards, you're feeling that you want to learn more about, you want to get more skill set, but you don't quite have it right now, that continuing education, whether it's going back and doing a bachelor's or doing one of the continuing education programs at places like Temple University, how that can help you with that. But in today's episode, we're going to look at just in kind of two lenses. We might jump in between the two and it will be chaos, but we'll find out what happens. First is for you as an individual, about your Ikigai, what's your purpose, why are you here? And then a little bit more about this role of continuing education and lifelong learning in supporting listeners' Ikigais. So let's start with the man behind the myth. Justin, tell me a little bit about yourself and what your Ikigai is and why you're here today.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for having me today. It's interesting. As an academic, or I've sort of given a lot of presentations, conferences, and big audiences and things, but the topic was always something very much other than myself. So I'm a little bit, I don't know, nervous, excited today, like an excited energy to talk about something a little bit more personal. So I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. So myself, I'm fairly average upbringing, like very much middle income, middle class, suburbs of California, and went to public school my whole life and everything. And, I found myself doing two things, sort of, as a high school student and as an undergrad. One was working a lot with international students. I sort of hosted one completely by accident when I was in high school. And this sort of set me on this path towards, being a global citizen and a deep passion for international education and what that can do. So I was always very interested in the international. And then as an undergraduate, I didn't really have a strong sense of what my future direction in life was going to be or anything like that. And I was in this political science course, and they asked, we had a homework assignment and said, pick what you see as the biggest challenge facing the world today, and offer up some possible solutions to solve that challenge. And so I go home and I'm thinking about this homework assignment, and there's all kinds of problems, right? AIDS epidemic at that time, and we were already aware of global warming at that time, various conflicts going on around the world, social inequality was growing, and I started to realize that no matter what topic you pick, at some level, that can be tied directly back to education. Right. So whether it's a medical issue, I think now with COVID, for example, these sort of global pandemics and health issues are on everybody's mind. And that can be tied to the education of public awareness, helping people understand what they need to do to keep themselves as safe as they can, and to be responsible for other people. The vaccines and the treatments that come out of it are very much grounded in the medical research and education that happens at institutions like universities. And you can talk about the same thing with armed conflicts, people getting educated to the point where they are able to see things from multiple perspectives. And so global warming, it's an education issue again about, what can we be doing to stop this? And so I sort of realized at that time that, if I did something in that field, then I would be able to basically go to bed every night, knowing that I'm at least pushing things in the right direction, and it leaves you really wide open. So I developed this passion for education, knowing that I could basically do anything. I could work
Right.
almost in any different sector, and still stay tied to that somehow. And so that led me on this path. Shortly after I graduated from university, I joined the Peace Corps, which is a U.S. government volunteer
Yeah.
organization, and I spent 2 years living and working in rural Azerbaijan. Um, at a sort of elementary, secondary school. Teaching English there was my primary mission. But what I found is that I actually enjoyed really working with the other instructors in Azerbaijan, and then eventually at a national level in the country. And so um, when we think of education, we have this concept of a classroom traditionally, right? Most people think of, okay, sitting in a class, students, teacher, lecturing. Um, but that experience working with the other educators sort of again broadened my conception of what education could mean. And when I came back to the United States, I found myself in Washington, D.C., working with the Association of Community College Trustees. So I was working to help educate the governing boards of community colleges around the country. So to help them more effectively understand their roles as policymakers, and what the difference was between administration and support their institutions. A lot of people don't realize this, but community colleges represent about half of all higher education students in the United States.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they're this really, really important institution that does not get anywhere near the recognition that it deserves.
Or
And
the
so I really
funding,
try to
I
get,
imagine.
or the funding, yeah, exactly. And it's not been moving in the right direction. But hopefully now with Dr. Biden, very close, we'll get a little bit more recognition on that front. But community colleges are really amazing because the populations that they serve are often these sort of non-traditional students. So people who are outside of what you think of as the traditional university student, right?
Right.
And I was looking at some statistics earlier, and the numbers vary because it's really hard to say what is a traditional student and what is a non-traditional student. But as little as 16% of all higher education students are what we think of as the full-time undergraduate, 18 to 22-year-olds whose sort of parents support them.
Right.
So it's a very, very, very small portion of our concept of university students, or at least the concept that we may have from Animal House or something like that.
Yes.
But and that was a really fantastic opportunity for me, but it was missing what I knew was a central element in my life. I was doing really fantastic work, and being able to meet a lot of amazing people from around the United States, but I was very much working on a domestic and a national level.
Right.
So while I was in that role, my boss was kind enough to help support me through graduate school. So I did a graduate program in international education, where we talked a lot about global educational policy issues and education for national development and that sort of thing, which then led me to join an organization called the International Baccalaureate,
Right.
which took me out of higher ed and worked in kind of the K through 12 sector, but more internationally. And so then I got to work with a very, very wide range of schools, and really came to understand some of the stark differences between public education and international schools and what they
Right.
provide, and really get into the concept of learner development, which was really what the IB is about, is how do you create curriculum and assessment to develop the individual, which was fascinating work, and was with them for about 7 years. And in 2011, I believe, the Japanese government started a project with the IB where they set a goal of introducing the International Baccalaureate's curriculum into 200 schools throughout Japan. And I was in the Singapore office at that time, working as sort of a higher education university liaison for the organization. So I came out to Japan relatively frequently to meet with different universities and to organize sessions to help the universities understand the IB curriculum. And through those, I met a researcher at Osaka University who was studying the IB, and she invited me to come do a PhD with her.
Right.
And I accepted that invitation, and that gave me the opportunity to really set aside 3 years to do a quite in-depth study of international strategic planning at universities in East Asia, including Singapore. And so that again brought me back to both higher education, but looking at things from the institutional perspective once again. And now, once I finished that program, I came over to Temple University, and which is a really fantastic role where I get to help people, through this continuing education program. It's kind of, it merges everything, right? I get to take the non-traditional learner background from the community colleges. I get to take the international element because we're basically the only fully functioning university, foreign university in Japan. So as a branch campus, it's really an inherently international institution. I get to work at the program level, but then I get to be quite deeply connected to a lot of the individual students and seeing their individual journeys. So it's really this amazing mix of how sticking with one central idea, but really a wide variety of roles can kind of eventually come together in one place.
Interesting. So you've taken education as this red thread going all through, not quite knowing where it would, it's actually not quite this, it's kind of this path actually. Listeners, I'm doing waving hands. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to laugh at me. But yeah, so there's a red thread going through with education at its heart. But as you said, there's the different pieces of, the volunteer work in Azerbaijan, and then the community college stuff back in the States, and IB, and then now you're in this situation where you're really looking at mostly mature. Well, you also have the undergrads are in the university as well, right? But then the continuing education program, does it have elocution lessons? The continuing education program, is focusing on career people who are mid-career and beyond. What's the average age actually at TUJ's continuing education? What sort of demographic?
Sure. So the average age of our student is probably in the early 40s.
Right.
I think about 65% of our students are in their 30s and 40s.
Right.
We do have some, as young as 14, I believe. Oh, and our oldest learner in the program is 92.
92.
Yeah, which is really.
What do you mind telling me what that person's studying right now?
Right now, the last class that he took was Chinese, I believe. But he's a lifelong learner, so he's a serial student with us, and he goes through and takes a variety of personal interest and language development and all kinds of things. So it's we do see quite a few of those that are. They do this as a sort of this habitual practice of lifelong learning. We talk so much about skill development and education that is applicable and relevant. And you can gain these accounting skills or these business skills because they can help you in your career.
Yeah.
But there's also this element of learning keeps your brain elastic.
Yes.
It keeps it functioning. It keeps it sharp. I think I don't know if this is an exact parallel, but if you think of those 7 habits of highly effective people,
Yes.
the last habit is sharpening the saw, right?
Mm.
And so this continual process of learning can really help your brain be adaptive to new scenarios and keep it active and keep those neuron pathways, acting like superhighways as opposed to
Cul-de-sacs,
overgrown
maybe.
backcountry roads, right? So we do have quite a few people in the program who use it in that sense as well.
Right. And I think that's the fascinating connection to Ikigai and this idea of lifelong learning as, a reason to get out of bed in the morning. I have a class. There is a teacher waiting for me. There are my classmates. There is the coursework. There's something to get up. So one, I suppose, is the external accountability. There's a societal and a community connection, which is an important element of Ikigai. But the other is I just want to learn something. Like there's so much in the world. So I'm properly full body goosebumps for this 92-year-old. He's my hero. I hope I will still be actively learning at 92. That's brilliant. And I'm a graduate of the continuing education program. We were talking about that before. Yeah. And whilst it was a fair few years ago, I think at the time, though, most of my learning was around that skill set, like how is this useful to my job? So it's really interesting to think about. There's the job focus, the skill set. How is this basically going to make me more money? How am I going to get promoted with this? As well as just the love of learning. And when we were talking previously, we were discussing, the 100-year life, and this gentleman that you talk of is one of those. And you talk something about the 60-year curriculum. Could you tell me a bit more about that, Justin?
Sure. It's really this fascinating concept that came out of a guy called Gary Martin out of UC Irvine relatively recently. I think 2017 or 16, he might have coined this phrase. And the concept is that now, as more of us are living to be 100 years old, the traditional 3-stage life model is no longer applicable or no longer relevant. So it used to be education, work, maybe 40 years of work perhaps, and then retirement. But it just doesn't look like that anymore. So a lot of us now are going to find ourselves probably in 60 years of work in our careers. And with the rapid technological and social changes that happen in the world, there's no way that the skill sets and the things that we learned through our more traditional early stages of life education are going to serve us throughout that entire 6 decades worth of work. And
that's true, yeah.
There's no way, right? How many people now have made enormous fortunes off of social media, and how many people have careers as social media marketers and this kind of thing, and we wouldn't even blink an eye out of it. Well, what do you do? Oh, I'm a social media marketer. Okay, that's normal. That's a normal job. That job did not exist when we were in university, at least not when I was in university, right? It didn't exist.
So you're aging yourself there a bit, Justin, but
a little bit. And there's countless examples like that.
And jobs that are just becoming obsolete. So I really love that website. Is it something? Maybe University of Cambridge? Yeah, will robots take my job?
Yeah.
That's always useful. Facilitators and coaches still seem to be okay.
Okay, good. You picked a great Ikigai.
But who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. Well, they talk about now that between 2018 and in 2018 it was something. I'm going to get the numbers a little bit wrong, but relatively something about 29% of work is done by robots and computers. And by 2022, So next year, that number increases to 42%.
43.
42,
Wow. 42, 43, but over
yeah.
40%.
So that's, that's in 4 years. And so our relationship with technology and with AI and with computers are really, really, really changing the landscape of the world of work, but they're doing it incredibly rapidly. And that's going to happen increasingly rapidly. So we ourselves need to do something to, not necessarily to try to compete and try to advance our knowledge and our understanding faster than the computers do it, because that doesn't make any sense. But our relationship to AI and to technology is constantly evolving and constantly changing. And as that relationship changes and how we use it as a tool, we ourselves need to develop new understandings and new capacities so we can most effectively use these tools that are coming into existence. And so that requires this sort of habitual learning, where it's no longer like, okay, I go for my undergraduate and I major in this topic and it takes me 3 to 4 years. It's got to be this continually going back and saying, okay, this is the skill set that I need now for my either daily life, for my daily work. And it's not always about work, right? Personal lives require different skills and different knowledge at different stages. I've recently come into a situation where I'm starting to think a lot about my financial future. So we had a kid recently, and that has changed my relationship with money and investing. So, I recently within our own program took a class on real estate investment. Not because I'm necessarily thinking that's something that is I don't need it for my job. That's true, but I may be at a place where I need to start thinking about the future of not only myself but somebody else. So how do I best prepare for that? And that never changed in my life. I could have done that when I was 20. I was always going to have to probably think about this, but it just wasn't a priority.
Yeah. So being a dad, becoming a dad was sort of a catalyst for, okay, now we need to think about that, and having a young child makes you reassess, realign your Ikigai, and what's useful for you. I think just different life experiences, different stages are going to make people think that. So when you think about the types of programs that you're running now at Temple, and maybe what would happen in the future, looking at this idea of a 60-year curriculum, and if someone said, well, like, where do I start? Like, what should I study? Like, there's so much knowledge in the world. And whether it's Temple or any other provider, there's not a shortage of knowledge or access to courses in the world. So how do I decide?
Well, I think you have to set some goals, and I think you have to balance your goals and your ambitions with your interests. So there are different ways you can approach it. What am I interested in? What do I not know enough about that sort of I wish I knew something about that kind of gets me a little bit excited. And this can be even for like a hobby. So something like photography or cooking or something like that, is if you're just trying to go from where you are to take it to the next level, to take that next step, then find something that interests you. And I think that is definitely one approach, and that will at least help you start to form the habit of learning. And so whatever hobbies or interests you have in your own life, you're moving down this path of development. Being in Japan and being an educator that's worked internationally, language learning has always been kind of a big thing. And there's sort of this national obsession with language learning in Japan. It's this.
I'm really biting my tongue.
There's a constant rhetoric on both the international and the domestic side about language learning, and whether that's learning Japanese or learning English or what have you. And so you hear a lot like, what's the best study method? How do you get to the level of getting an N2 or getting a certain score on TOEFL or something like that? And one of the things that I always tell people is that, yeah, studying is important, but if you're studying just to study, you're probably going to get burnt out. You're probably not going to progress very far because it's a chore. And you need to find some reason why you're doing this. So what is it about speaking Japanese, or what is it about speaking English that motivates you? And so is it want to, and this is especially true working with undergraduate Japanese students who perhaps aren't motivated to learn English, but they may be very motivated to understand a particular song, or to be able to interact and do things when they go on vacation to Singapore, Taiwan, Hawaii, or New York, or what have you. And so you have to personalize it a little bit. So what are your interests? And then find outlets or opportunities that can align to that. So that's, I think, one path of, okay, where do I start?
So really,
the other is,
may I just summarize my understanding? So not just having that goal and understanding what it is that you want is not going to be enough to drive you through the learning experience. You have to have that personal connection to the output or to the use case of the study if you want to actually be able to finish the course. That sounds quite true when I think about my current Japanese study, which is none, because I've got to a level where I can, function in society. I can do some business in it. So I don't have that strong motivation anymore to go back and hit the books and, getting my N1, as it's called now. I don't really care. So it's not going to happen for me when there's all these other things I could study. But thinking about other people as well, I'm just remembering what I studied accounting at, I'm laughing to remember it. And I knew I would never be an accountant. I think it was finance for non-financial managers was the name of the course. And it was a great course. But I really approached it more from what's the solving of the puzzle. Right. And also
what do you mean by that?
It wasn't, I wasn't doing it because I wanted to become an accountant.
Right.
It was, how much do I need to know in order to be functioning at the next level in my job?
Got it.
So I just need to get to that level and that will be fine. So I think something as well about with that type of study, though, if that's your only connection to it, you're not going to be getting an A grade. It's a solid pass.
Sure.
So I think also disconnecting that for continuing education as well, which was tough for me to do.
Well, and I think you raise a really important point, though, is specialization is incredibly important in today's world of work, right? If you're a generalist, that can help you in a lot of ways, but we're increasingly needing to be specialists in particular areas. But having an understanding of those fields that you're not a specialist in is extraordinarily helpful, because you have to have some concept of that there is this depth that exists in these other areas. And so knowing that when you interact, if you're in a big company, for example, and you have to interact with the finance team, having some kind of understanding of what they need to go through in order to make certain things happen. Or in a case where you're running your own business, even if you're outsourcing perhaps your taxes or having somebody help you with these accounting things, you want to know if you're getting quality work in return, right? So having a basic structure of an outline, I think, is really important. There's increasingly this T model of education that a lot of schools are trying to develop these learners that have quite a breadth of understanding in many, many different areas. sort of the liberal arts model, if you will, right? But then one deep sort of specialized understanding in a particular area. So it's kind of paying attention to both sides of that. So, I think your example is right on.
Right. So I was summarizing, and you're about to talk about the second way to get started. So
sure. So
continue.
So the first way basically is where are you at and what interests you, and so where can be the next step. The second way is to kind of backwards map it, right? Where is it that you want to go long term, and then what can help you get there. So you go sort of, depends on your vision and your goals and your thinking. But if you look far into the future, or perhaps not that far into the future, and you're like, I want to start my own business, for example. I've got an idea, but I don't necessarily know how to go about this whole thing. And so there are particular skill sets that may be able to help you in that. And you're not going to develop all of them overnight. But you can say, okay, I need a basic fundamental understanding of accounting, human resource management, business planning, and these different other elements. And so start acquiring both the knowledge and the skill sets, as well as the networks that are going to help you reach that goal one day. So, I guess in my personal case, for example, especially in Japan, but I think in a lot of different countries, there's a concept of an academic as a researcher. And so if you go for a PhD, you're mainly doing that because you have a deep and burning fascination with a particular question that you want to dedicate your life to. And so you develop this enormous research project around it. And oftentimes the end goal is to be a professor at a university so that you can then spend your life researching this topic. And that's a very, very common conception for a lot of academics, and why somebody would go for a PhD. So in my case, I was in my mid 30s, I guess, at that point. And so I was past the point of people entering school normally. And I didn't do it with the objective of setting out to be an academic in the traditional sense. But for what I did want to do in terms of working fairly high up at the institutional level in the educational sector, really getting the opportunity to be involved in strategic planning and setting the directions for an organization that could potentially help the lives of millions of people. In order to reach that level, okay, I'm going to need, in this case, it was a credential. But it also was a couple different skill sets that came out of that PhD, the research background, the opportunity to teach in tertiary education and these kinds of things. So for me, it was like, okay, I need to check these 4 or 5 boxes and acquire these skills and perhaps these credentials in order to, eventually at some point in my career, get to this kind of place where I think that I can bring the most value and have the biggest positive impact. So I'm not quite there yet, for sure. I'm not quite there yet, for sure, but that developing that foundation is going to keep those doors open in the future.
Interesting, because sometimes I see people are, following certification, following learning things, and it can seem like I can't even think of what the word is, putting off like a strategy to avoid taking action, like, and I'm going to get another PhD and I'm going to get this and I'm going to, take this course and do this thing, rather than actually just do the work and get my idea out. But I like the way that you have also described it as a sort of hygiene factors. You can't necessarily get that type of role unless you have this credential. And whilst it's all great to say that the world is a meritocracy and you should do it based on, being the best candidate, there are sometimes things where it's not going to be impossible if you don't have a PhD, but the level of scrutiny which you will be under as a candidate or as a potential member of whatever this organization is going to be so much higher that you just, it's just hard. So if having that PhD experience and all those other skill sets that you described came with it, Justin, are going to make that later on easier, then it's a worthwhile, I don't want to say the word investment, but I'm going to say it, investment of your time and of your life to get that as an understanding of this is how the world is currently working in this sphere. Mm-hmm. And there's no one in these hallowed halls who isn't a PhD. So if that's what it requires, then I'm going to get a PhD because I that's where I see, as you said, I can offer the most value and have the most impact.
Right, exactly. And this can be applied in lots of different situations. So if you think about, I think there's probably a lot of your listeners, are thinking about their own career development, right? And they want to get to a place where they're managing teams or perhaps managing divisions and managing several teams, for example. Because really, once you get to that point, you not only have the reward of doing the work, but you have the reward of mentorship and being able to help other people reach their goals and kind of come up, which is extremely, extremely rewarding. Yeah. But to get to that point, you need to be a good manager, right? And so you do things now that are going to help set the stage to develop your leadership skills, to develop your negotiation skills and your management capacities, so that when you are in charge of your team, you can help them achieve better, which is going to help you move up to the next level if that's your goal. And so it's thinking about what can I start to do now that may not be the end goal, but is going to at least help me develop the foundation that is going to make it easier to get to where it is I want to go.
So you talked a little bit about, some of the ways that you can get started with the working backwards and deciding what that end goal is and what do I require to do that, or, going with the idea of your interests and where you feel like, this course sounds cool. Kind of, I think that was some of the ways I chose that. I did the wine course at Temple University, and that was definitely this sounds cool thing to do with my husband. And it was a cool thing to do with my husband, and we had a great time. One of the other things, though, is to think about is what type of study, how do I study? So could you talk a little bit about that? And obviously, there's Temple has an undergraduate offerings and continuing education. And again, in the world, there's also various MOOCs and open courses and all of those things. So what are your thoughts and suggestions for people who are also overwhelmed with all the opportunities out there for learning, which is a nice champagne problem to have, isn't it?
Absolutely. That is a fantastic question, because we're at a place in history now where the number of choices and the types of options are unprecedented. There's no lack of content and information out there, right? If you are motivated, you can become an expert on any topic in the world with simply a computer and an internet connection. It's very, very, very difficult for an individual to have that discipline and to have that sort of critical understanding where they're able to figure out what the best sources of information are for a particular topic. If you search marketing, for example, you're going to come up with a list of hundreds of different keywords, and it's hard to know, well, what are the 5 that are most important? What are the foundational principles or the theories that I need to understand and being able to apply to the field in general? So courses in education are a way of kind of taking all of that information in the world and curating them. So having somebody who has experience with them, either as an academic, a researcher, or a practitioner, and sort of bringing these important points together. And now we're in a place where that can happen in quite a wide variety of different ways. You can go onto YouTube and you can follow some people, and it's receptive. You're probably not doing a lot of critical but you can at least start to know if this is interesting, if I can absorb it, if I can see connections with my life, and start to understand some basic fundamental principles. You can get a little bit deeper and go into what's called asynchronous online learning,
Mhm.
which basically is something like Coursera or Udemy or LinkedIn Learning, where you can go and you can work through a series of videos, and maybe take a couple of quizzes, and you do them at your own pace. And this can be really, really effective for short-term skill development, where, when every job I've ever had, since lynda.com started, I think back in the mid 2000s, I've always made sure that, asked my employer that they give me an account, so that whatever I'm going through, early stages of my career, I had to, develop some brochures and things like that, and I'd never done that before, and so the first thing I did was go into lynda.com, learn about a little bit of graphic design and what is it, like the golden,
A golden ratio.
yeah, the golden
Yeah.
ratio and things like that, to be able to, okay, well, now I can do this. I had to build a database at one point. So these sort of short-term courses, where you don't really need an instructor, you just need the information organized. You need to be able to practice a little bit, and then kind of do that skill. These can be really helpful. And then we can go on to something like where you take an individual course, which, as you sort of alluded to earlier, has the benefit of a shared learning experience, where you are responsible to other people. You're accountable to the instructor to do the homework. You're perhaps working on teams. And this helps you to keep motivated, but it also has the advantage of, and this is especially true for adult learning, is when you're in a class with maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 other individuals who are perhaps at similar stages in their lives and their careers, but come from different backgrounds, come from different countries, that adds this very rich element of discussion to the classroom, and being able to bring together perspectives, from different walks of lives and different professional backgrounds, that you may not normally think of. So it's quite a different experience than, combing through content online that's curated for you.
Yeah. That's
And then,
definitely what I took away as one of the strongest pieces of the learning from my continuing education experience at Temple, and then when I work as a facilitator. If it's just, one way teaching, sort of standing at the front and telling you what you all think, then the retention is so low. And then being able to apply that skill set when you're back at your desk without your textbook open, the chance of that is almost nothing. Or like, what do I do when it's not exactly this way? I can remember, oh, that's what, Tayo said about what was happening in his company. Maybe that's what's happening here. I can perhaps apply that knowledge. So it's really, really powerful to develop a sort of critical awareness of how to apply the skills.
And how to apply them to different situations. So there's going back to this concept of the 60-year curriculum and the 60-year work life. As your situation and your context constantly changes, you need to take the skills you have and transfer them to new context. And that can only be done through deep learning. So you really engage with a topic or some content or a subject to the point that you internalize it. And so those skills and that knowledge is no longer applicable just to the one situation that you studied in, but okay, well, here's a new context. I've never encountered this before, but I can take the things that I learned previously, and I understand it at a deep enough level that I can figure out how to apply it to this new context. And language learning is like that a lot too, right? You do these repetition of these scenarios as you're learning Japanese over and over and over again. But eventually your vocabulary and your grammar gets deep enough to the point that you can start to engage with new contexts and new scenarios that you've never encountered before.
Right.
And so, the learning, it's not just languages, but any subject.
Yes, like, we have to deal with a pandemic now. So how do I apply those skill sets in this now?
Perfect example.
And so you were talking about, having this shared class or course experience, and then I guess the next level is
a degree, right?
Is a degree level,
Where you're looking at 2 to 3 to 4 years of fairly rigorous study on a very narrow topic that ultimately should come out with something new, something novel, something that you created based on that couple years or several years of study. So once you get into these sort of higher levels of education, it becomes less about pulling in information from more places and more sources, as opposed to taking something, designing a study to discover new information, and then putting that out there into the world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that idea of. I've always felt that, you know, the degree education, as it was positioned to me when in the 3-stage life, was very much about taking on knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I really appreciate what you said then, Justin, about, you know, bringing together. It's like you bring together now, if you come back as a mature student, you know, all your life experiences, all those different things that you've done, and then you ask a question in a new way to find this new knowledge and bringing that new knowledge into the world.
Which I understand is in part of the reason that we're having this conversation now, right?
Yes.
You are, you know, maybe you're not doing it at a university, but it's the same concept. You're taking your life experiences and now taking the life experiences of other people and bringing that together into something new, right?
Yes, and then the listener or the watcher will take all of these tidbits of information and decide how they want to apply it in the new way to their new situation in their life as well. Oh, amazing. Who'd have thought? Who'd have thought? There we go. So the final question that I have is really for you to, you know, take the stage, free microphone now. If there's one piece of advice that you would give to someone who is looking to find their purpose, to find their Ikigai, and maybe education is the way, where do they start?
That's a very difficult question, right?
I save it till the end.
Yeah, and it definitely depends on where people are at with their lives. I would say 2 things. I would say one is to approach it with open eyes, open heart, open mind. When I was younger, and my whole life, but you know, in my 20s, I traveled a lot. And a lot of people would always tell me, "Oh, you're so lucky that you get to do that." And I always found that to be such a strange comment because, from my perspective, luck had nothing. Yeah, perhaps in some, you know, I was fortunate enough to be mobile and these kinds of things, but it had to do with my priorities. It had to do with what I thought was important in life and what I wanted to do. And I never thought like, I never really looked at the barriers to like, oh, I can't travel because of this, and this. If I did, then it was like, well, how can I remove those barriers? So I would say that one piece of advice I would have is that there's always going to be excuses. There's always going to be reasons not to do it. There's always going to be challenges. There's never going to be a perfect time.
Oh, yes.
So just take that first step. Start small if you want, or start huge. You know, make a total life change, and just don't give it a whole lot of thought. And just do
Sounds
it.
like how I started my business, but there you go.
Exactly. You know,
there was some thought.
You jump in with both feet, and you learn to swim. But don't approach these things with like this kind of I can't mentality, or it's too hard, or I don't know where to start. Well, if you don't know where to start, then just start anywhere. Yeah. Really. And you're either going to find you like it or you don't like it. So that's one. The other is probably more boring piece of advice, but for me, it's been really helpful, is the idea of forming habits. You know, I have to make things habitual in my life. And my inspiration for that was Vince Lombardi, who was quite a famous American football coach for the Green Bay Packers. And he's often taken out of context, but winning isn't the only thing. Winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. And his whole thing was his team has to practice as if they're playing the most important game. And it's by setting up these habits that eventually, when you're faced with the more difficult situations, it's really not that challenging because you've already sort of established these habits. And so you talked a little bit before about, what is your Ikigai? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What helps you start to the day? For me, I don't do mornings well. I do not jump out of bed in the morning at all. But, I've set up sort of habits and routines that have progressively made it easier throughout my life. And so I think it's really important to find ways to make learning habitual. Now, that doesn't mean you have to take a class every semester or get an account subscription to LinkedIn Learning or anything like that. But you're always going to encounter things in your life, and you're always going to have free time and free periods on the weekend or something. And so how can you integrate learning into your sort of daily or weekly or yearly routines? And then how can you build good habits from that? So those would be my two pieces of advice.
And my two sort of ideas which came up as I was listening to you. So one is on the first part about there'll always be excuses. I've just started to read the autobiography, in translation, I will admit, of Yayoi Kusama, and how she went to America after 7 years of fighting with her family. And it was pretty hard for a single Japanese woman to just get to America, but she just did it. She wrote a letter to Georgia O'Keeffe and said, please help me come to America. And she did. So, Kusama-san just wouldn't accept the excuses and had this dream and did it, and kind of got out of Dodge, which was what she needed for her art. And then the sort of second point, which I've forgotten, I wish I'd taken a note now. Oh my goodness, what's a bad interviewer? What was your second point you were talking about? Habits, yes, and learning. Thank you. So in the group Make March Matter that I run, every Friday we do, a review of the week, what went well, like, big and little wins, anything you didn't achieve this week. But the really useful question is, what did you learn? And how will you apply that in the future? And so whilst we are not necessarily in formal education, as people running their own businesses through a pandemic, everyone is going, oh yes, what did I learn this week? And it's really interesting. Again, you're hearing from people from all different industries, all different walks of life. So what we have in common is that we are all small business owners. And yeah, what did you learn this week?
Right. And the habit that you are talking about is the habit of reflection.
Yes.
So looking back and seeing what lessons, that's exceptionally important. So yes, that's a very good habit to get those people to have.
Great. Thank you. So unfortunately, we are out of time, but people can find you at all the various links, which will be in the show notes, to find out more about continuing education at Temple University. Other places are also available if you are not in Japan. But one great thing about COVID, actually, for people who are in Japan is that there's more access. You don't need to be in Tokyo anymore to join many of the courses, right?
Right, absolutely. We have quite a lot of online, either actually remote taught or fully online asynchronous. But it doesn't matter where you are. One of the nice things is there's always going to be local institutions, local universities that are doing something like this. There are really these amazing community resources for people to take advantage of. So we're very happy to support our community here in Tokyo and Japan more widely and increasingly globally. But there's many others doing this as well. So I would, the takeaway really is you have support, you have help, so no matter what you want to do. And if you want to get in touch with me personally on LinkedIn or something like that and not talk about Temple at all, but just get some advice.
Talk about sleep regression with an 8-month-old.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to support.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Justin. And I hope that all the listeners and viewers of Ikigai with Jennifer Shinkai can still be loving and learning at 92 years old, like your student is. What an inspiration. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too.